you already sense more than you know. It's not that the signs aren't there. It's that no one ever taught you how to read them. Because people, whether they mean to or not, leave trails. They leak truth through silence, overreactions, deflections, and awkward laughter. It's not about having a gift. It's about learning to notice what was always visible. And once you do, you can't unsee it. But this isn't about manipulation or cheap tricks. It's about understanding, truly understanding people, and in the process, understanding yourself. From the time we're children, we're conditioned to trust words. Language becomes the lens we use to interpret the world. But words lie. People lie. Not because they're malicious, but because they're scared. Most speak not from clarity, but from fear. Not from self-awareness, but from habit. What you hear from someone's mouth is rarely the full story, because what looks like kindness might just be fear of abandonment. What looks like strength might just be someone holding it together by a thread. People aren't always trying to deceive you. In fact, more often, they're hiding from themselves. They build masks to survive, masks that look like confidence, generosity, humility. But underneath is the real story, aching to be seen, even when they don't realize it. It's in the way their eyes shift when the conversation hits too close, in the way they fidget when silence stretches too long, in the way their tone flattens when asked about something raw. These cracks are invitations. Everyone wears a mask, not because they're fake, but because they're human. It's how we navigate society, protect wounds, avoid rejection. But the mask always slips. You'll see it in tension, in discomfort, in the places someone resists going. If you want to know who someone really is, don't just listen to what they say. Watch where they get uncomfortable. People also tell you who they are by what they hate. Criticism is a mirror. The person who rages against arrogance often fears they're not enough. The one who constantly points out dishonesty is likely struggling with truths they've never faced. The trait they call out in others is the trait they secretly fear within themselves. What we attack is often what we're trying to deny. Silence, too, speaks volumes. When someone dodges a question, when they give a mechanical answer to a deeply personal topic, they're not just avoiding you. They're revealing themselves. Truth doesn't always come dressed in explanation. Sometimes it's in the stammer, the pause, the swift change of subject. Words can deceive. Silence rarely does. Then there are those who proclaim their virtue loudly. The ones who seem to be moral compasses, always correcting others, always showing their goodness. It looks like integrity, but sometimes it's vanity in disguise. True virtue is quiet. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't demand to be seen. The louder the virtue signal, the more likely there's a shadow being hidden behind it. When someone lies, it's rarely to hurt you. They've told themselves the same lie so many times that they've begun to believe it. I'm okay. It doesn't matter. I've moved on. These aren't lies aimed outward. They're survival scripts, the stories we rehearse to keep functioning. If a person's words don't match their energy, look closer. They've likely been lying to themselves far longer than they've lied to you. Superiority, when it's flaunted, is almost always a mask for deep insecurity. People who truly feel powerful don't need to announce it. But those who feel small often try to appear big. They drop names, flash status, dominate conversations, not to impress you, but to convince themselves. And if you look beneath that need to prove, you'll usually find a scared child who never felt seen. Reading people isn't about judgment, it's about compassion. When you see someone interrupt constantly, maybe it's not arrogance, maybe it's fear of being overlooked. When someone posts non-stop about happiness, maybe it's because they're barely holding on. When they avoid eye contact while saying they're fine, maybe their body is telling you the truth their words can't. Understanding others makes you less reactive. It frees you from hate. Because the more clearly you see, the more grace you carry. And it's not just for others, it's for yourself. Because the moment you learn to read masks, you start questioning your own. Most people act from fear, not intention. They over-explain because they're afraid of being misunderstood. They dominate conversations because they're scared of being dismissed. They vanish when things get close because they don't know how to stay. So when you see someone acting out of alignment, don't ask, why are they like this? Ask, what are they afraid of losing? Criticism, again, reveals far more about the speaker than the target. If someone is constantly mocking sensitivity, maybe they were never allowed to be sensitive. If they lash out at others' appearances, maybe they're at war with their own reflection. People point their arrows outward to avoid facing inward. But every harsh judgment is a breadcrumb back to their pain. You've met them, the ones who seem unshakably confident, composed, always in control. But behind that mask of certainty, there's often guilt. Maybe it's something they did. Maybe it's who they used to be. And instead of facing that, they build a fortress of composure. But look closely. The tension in their smile, the flinch under pressure, the over-prepared response. Real peace doesn't perform, it just is. When someone exaggerates, they're trying to drown out doubt. I don't care what people think. I'm always happy. Nothing bothers me. These aren't truths, they're rehearsals. And the louder the exaggeration, the deeper the insecurity it tries to cover. So don't be fooled by volume. Listen for what they're trying not to feel. Control is a coping mechanism. When someone can't tolerate unpredictability, when they manage every detail, when they force decisions, it's not power, it's panic. The mess inside feels so overwhelming that they try to order everything outside. The stricter someone becomes, the more likely they feel like they're barely holding it together. Look around and you'll see it. Performances everywhere, online especially. The curated identities, the choreographed smiles, the endless need to be watched. But real security doesn't shout. It doesn't need to be posted. When someone performs too loudly, it's not pride. It's emptiness trying to fill the silence. And suddenly, once you see this, it's everywhere. Someone tells a story, and you hear the fear behind it. Someone cracks a joke, and you catch the sadness it tries to cover. This isn't telepathy, it's attention. It's the ability to see past the script and into the soul. And that changes everything. Because now you're no longer confused by cruelty. You understand its protection. You're no longer impressed by dominance. You recognize it as fear. You stop reacting. You start witnessing. And that doesn't make you naive. It makes you unshakable. People aren't guided by logic. They're shaped by pain. Behind every cynical belief, every extreme opinion, every emotional wall is a moment that hurt too much. Love isn't real. Everyone lies. You can't trust anyone. These aren't philosophies. They're bandages. People don't form ideas from facts. They form them from wounds. So when someone tells you their worldview, look underneath it. Ask what they're trying to avoid ever feeling again. Watch how someone treats those with no power, not their boss, not their peers, the quiet one, the outsider, the weak. That's where character lives. True strength doesn't need to dominate. It holds space. It shows restraint. When someone can witness weakness and not recoil, when they can stay present with discomfort without needing to fix or flee, that's real power, because they've faced their own darkness and chosen not to pass it on. People chase attention when they're scared of being forgotten. The loudest person in the room, the one always reaching for the spotlight, is often the one most afraid of being erased. Childhood neglect becomes adult performance. The kid who never got a good job becomes the adult who can't stop performing. Don't be fooled by the noise. Listen for the ache underneath. Sometimes the person who attacks you doesn't hate you. They envy you. They see in you something they've disowned in themselves: freedom, confidence, joy, and instead of celebrating it, they lash out, because to admire would be to admit lack. Envy is a quiet grief, and if you can recognize it in others without reacting, you become untouchable. If you recognize it in yourself, you become free. We don't act from who we are. We act from who we had to be. The child who wasn't allowed to cry becomes the adult who never cries. The child who had to earn love becomes the adult who never stops performing. Behavior isn't random, it's a reenactment. So when you want to understand someone, don't just look at them now. Ask what role they had to play to survive. And finally, patterns are confessions. A person doesn't always know how to say, "I'm afraid," but they'll show it in every repeated behavior, in every avoidance, in every overreaction. These aren't flaws, they're maps. And if you learn to read them, you'll hear what was never said. You'll understand what was never explained. And that makes you a mirror, not a threat. Someone who reflects truth gently, without judgment. You don't need to fix anyone, just to see clearly. Because the more deeply you understand others, the more you reclaim the forgotten parts of yourself. This isn't just about reading people. It's about waking up. It's about seeing the wounds behind the armor, the fear beneath the anger, the humanity behind the performance. It's about being the kind of person who notices without blaming, who witnesses without attacking, who reads between the lines and responds with grace. Because when you understand others, you finally begin to understand yourself. And that, more than any trick or tactic, is what changes everything. You begin to notice it not just in others, but in yourself. The moment your voice gets sharper than it needs to be, the hesitation before you share something real, the way you scroll through your phone, not out of interest, but to avoid sitting alone with a feeling. These aren't random habits. They're echoes of what once protected you. And just like the people you've learned to read, you carry your own mask too. Maybe not to deceive others, but to stay functional in a world that never taught you how to feel safe being fully seen. Every overreaction has a backstory. Every avoidance has roots. And once you begin to track those stories, you begin to wake up, not just to who people pretend to be, but to who they were forced to become. You start noticing how the friend who always changes the subject when you talk about your success isn't being rude. They're reliving a wound. Maybe they grew up in a home where love felt competitive, where attention was earned by being broken, not whole. Or maybe they weren't allowed to celebrate themselves, so your joy feels like a foreign language. This is what real awareness looks like. It softens judgment and sharpens your clarity. Nietzsche didn't want you to become a skeptic of humanity. He wanted you to become a reader of it. Because when you can see the pattern, you no longer need the performance. You can sit across from someone and feel their story without them having to say a word. You see how a person who interrupts isn't trying to overpower the room. They're terrified of being forgotten. How the one who makes a joke out of everything isn't careless. They're shielding themselves from being hurt again. Every reaction is a translation of an older fear, and every personality trait is a fingerprint left behind by what someone didn't know how to grieve. You stop seeing drama and start seeing survival. You stop getting offended and start getting curious. You ask better questions. You listen for what's beneath the words, and something extraordinary begins to happen. You realize how much pain is carried silently. You begin to hear how often people ask for love without saying the word. And that's where connection is born. Not from agreement, but from understanding. There's something liberating about seeing this clearly, about knowing that when someone mocks your dreams, it's not because your dream is wrong, it's because they gave up on theirs. That when someone withdraws, the moment you open up, it's not about you, it's about what openness cost them in the past. Suddenly, you're no longer tangled in their confusion. You're simply witnessing their map. But here's the twist. As you get better at reading people, you start feeling the weight of their silence, their wounds, their unfinished sentences. And if you're not careful, you'll start carrying their pain like it's yours. That's why the final layer of this awareness isn't just insight, it's boundaries. To be able to see someone clearly, without absorbing what they haven't healed, to offer understanding without sacrificing your own peace, to hold space without losing yourself in it. Because the goal isn't to fix everyone. The goal is to recognize the humanity in them without letting it erase your own. And when you do that, when you can read someone with compassion and still walk away with clarity, that's when you've truly mastered what Nietzsche wanted you to see. That people are layered, that behavior is never just behavior, and that empathy without discernment turns into self-abandonment. You begin to recognize that most people aren't trying to hurt you. They're just trying to survive something you can't see. The parent who never praised you wasn't necessarily cruel. They might have never received praise themselves. The friend who disappeared when you needed them most might have been drowning in their own storm. The partner who couldn't love you well likely never learned what love without conditions looked like. These aren't excuses, they're explanations. And the difference matters. Because once you understand the pattern, you stop becoming a prisoner of it. And if you're brave enough, you'll start reading your own life the same way. You'll see how your tendency to pull away when things get good might not be self-sabotage. It might be your nervous system preparing for disappointment before it happens. How your need to be perfect isn't ego, it's protection. How your struggle to rest isn't laziness. It's inherited fear that rest means you're falling behind. You start realizing how deeply your childhood still speaks, not in words, but in routines, in who you choose, in what you tolerate, in what you're terrified to admit you need. And that's where the real work begins. Not in trying to change who you are, but in meeting those parts of yourself with the same patience you've learned to give others. Because you can't offer grace if you've never practiced it on your own scars. Nietzsche wasn't giving us truths to judge the world. He was handing us keys to unlock it, not so we could become critics of the human condition, but participants in healing it. And maybe, just maybe, healing ourselves in the process. The final truth isn't about others. It's about you, about how your patterns speak, even when your mouth is closed, about how your silence, your repetition, your hidden rituals all tell a story. And maybe you've never told anyone that story before. Maybe you've never even said it to yourself. But it's there. And when you listen to your own behavior, the way you've learned to listen to others, you'll hear it clearly. You'll notice the moment you start pretending to be okay. You'll catch yourself before you overextend. You'll feel the ache in your body when you say yes out of fear instead of truth. And in that moment, you're no longer living on autopilot. You're no longer acting out the script you were handed. You're awake. And awareness, real awareness, is the birthplace of freedom. Because the most powerful thing you'll ever do is see yourself clearly and still choose love. Not because you're flawless, but because you've stopped demanding perfection as a prerequisite for worth. The more you accept your own mask, the less you need others to remove theirs. You just show up real, present, whole, and suddenly, people don't feel judged around you. They feel safe. Because when someone finally sees them without agenda, without analysis, just with presence, that's rare. And rare things change people. So the next time someone snaps at you, pauses too long, or suddenly pulls away, don't rush to take it personally. Pause. Breathe. Ask what they're protecting, what they've never been allowed to feel, what they're hoping you won't notice. And then ask yourself the same questions, because this entire journey of learning to read others has always quietly been about learning to read yourself. You're not just someone who understands people now. You're someone who feels them. And when you meet the world that way, with clarity in your mind and compassion in your chest, you no longer chase connection. You create it, simply by being what most people have never known. A mirror that reflects truth, a space that feels safe, a presence that doesn't demand performance. That's not just power, that's transformation. And it starts with how you see, not the world as it wants to be seen, but as it truly is, layered, masked, but never beyond understanding.